Good evening, and welcome back to Future Lore. What if the gods of ancient Egypt were not myth at all, but beings of flesh, light, and intelligence, dwelling alongside humanity? What if the towering forms of Ra, Isis, Osiris, and Thoth were not symbolic figures carved from imagination, but different species of advanced beings who cohabitated with humankind, guiding them, teaching them, and building with them? And what if the very technologies that raised the pyramids, aligned temples with the stars, and etched stone with impossible precision, were not miracles of trial and error, but the result of shared knowledge between two worlds, human and otherworldly? The City of Harmonies. In the Nile Valley, sunlight blazes upon golden stone. The river glitters with the light of morning, carrying barges heavy with grain and papyrus. But above the ordinary rhythms of farming and trade, something extraordinary defines the empire. The presence of beings, not wholly human. They walk among the people, taller, radiant, their features marked by symbols of falcons, ibises, jackals, and lions. These are not masks nor myths, but the outward form of their kind. Some shimmer with iridescent skin, reflecting sunlight like polished gold. Others carry eyes that gleam like obsidian, watching with ageless patience. To the Egyptians they are gods, but to themselves they are kin to the stars, beings who crossed the void to shape life upon earth. The city resonates with their presence. Temples stand not only as places of worship, but as stations of power, humming with energy. Columns inscribed with hieroglyphs are not mere decoration. They are coded frequencies, inscribed knowledge that vibrates with resonance when sunlight strikes them. Walls glow faintly at dusk, as if the very limestone remembers the touch of otherworldly hands. The technology of stone and light. Every block of granite and limestone placed upon the Giza Plateau bears testimony to this shared power. The stones are not dragged by slaves, nor rolled on crude sledges, but lifted through a mastery of resonance. Humans, under the guidance of their otherworldly companions, harness sound to move matter. Vast crystals embedded within devices pulse with frequency, making stone lighter than air for brief moments. Teams of workers guide the floating blocks into place with ropes and poles, their chants timed to the vibration, their voices harmonizing with the technology. The precision of the cuts comes not from hammer and chisel, but from beams of concentrated energy, tools resembling rods of stone or metal, which channel the invisible force drawn from the earth itself. A single line of light slices through granite as though it were butter, leaving behind surfaces so smooth they shine after 4,000 years. Obelisks rise from quarries whole, not fractured, but lifted as monoliths by fields of resonance. They are set upright in sockets of stone, stabilized by waves of vibration that settle them perfectly into place. No guesswork, no crude trial. A marriage of human ingenuity and otherworldly technology. The cohabitation of species. Daily life is not servitude, but collaboration. Farmers tend their fields under the gaze of towering beings who advise on the cycles of the Nile with knowledge of tides, moons, and stars. Priests serve as translators, mediators between gods and humans, their rituals less about prayer and more about aligning frequencies, words, sounds, and chants that activate the energies woven into stone and sky. Children grow up accustomed to both kinds of teachers, Human scribes instruct them in writing, measure, and number, while divine beings demonstrate geometry through patterns of light, shaping sand into sacred proportions with a sweep of their hands. Apprentices learn medicine not only from herbs, but from resonance chambers hidden within temples, where vibration itself can knit bone and cleanse sickness. The gods are not distant rulers, but companions, co-creators. Humanity is not diminished by their presence, but elevated, learning arts and sciences far beyond what other civilizations will achieve for millennia. The temples as machines. The temples of Karnak, Luxor, and Dendera are not simply houses of worship. They are machines, living structures built with intention. When the sun strikes their pylons at dawn, energy channels awaken, vibrating through the columns and chambers. The inscriptions are not passive prayers, but codes that guide energy, like circuits etched in stone. Within the inner sanctums, pools of still water mirror the sky, used to chart the movement of stars with precision. Resonance chambers hum with tones when priests chant, amplifying voices until they ripple through stone walls. Healing rooms glow faintly, their walls embedded with quartz that resonates with frequencies designed to restore balance in the human body. And at night, when the stars blaze over the desert, the temples align perfectly with constellations. The gods stand beside the people, gazing skyward, reminding them that these heavens are not distant. They are home. Reflection. This is the world of ancient Egypt, not as myth, but as reality. A civilization where gods are not stories, but neighbors, where stone bends to sound and light, where temples hum as machines of energy and healing, where human hands and other worldly beings shape together a society of harmony and abundance. Close your eyes now and imagine it, the glow of limestone at dawn, the hum of obelisks as they rise, the presence of radiant beings walking side by side with farmers, scribes, and children. This is not imagination. This is daily life in a world where humanity and gods lived as one. To understand how the Egyptians lived under the guidance of their gods, one must first step into their schools. Not schools as we know them today, filled with desks and chalk, but halls of light and sound, where knowledge itself became an experience, not a lecture. The first lessons. Children of Egypt rose with the sun. Their mornings began not only with offerings to the gods at household shrines, but with the echo of chants drifting across the city. Education was not confined to the elite. Any child showing curiosity, any child whose voice harmonized well with the chants of resonance, was welcomed into the sacred halls. The schools were not entirely human, nor entirely divine. Priests, robed in white, their heads shaved in devotion, guided lessons, but above them stood beings whose presence radiated authority. Some appeared with falcon-like features, sharp and regal. Others bore elongated skulls, their luminous eyes glowing faintly in shadow. These were not disguises or masks. They were beings of a different nature, but in the classrooms of Egypt, they were simply teachers. Writing as a gateway. The first skill every child learned was writing. Hieroglyphs were not arbitrary symbols, but living forms, each carrying a frequency, a vibration. When carved onto stone or inked onto papyrus, the symbol carried not just meaning, but energy. Teachers demonstrated how to hold the reed brush, how to trace curves that mirrored the flow of the Nile. To write the symbol of the falcon was not just to name Horus, but to invoke clarity and swiftness. To inscribe the symbol of water was not just to describe the flood, but to draw upon the rhythm of flow itself. Children discovered that writing was more than communication. It was participation in the fabric of the world. Each word was a thread in reality's tapestry, and to master it was to weave with intention. Geometry of the divine. Beyond words came numbers and forms. Geometry was not a dry discipline, but a sacred dance of lines and ratios. Children laid chords upon sand, measuring with pegs and shadows, guided by divine beings who revealed the harmony hidden within proportion. A triangle was not merely three sides. It was the embodiment of stability, echoing the pyramids. A circle was not just a round figure. It was the eternal, the cycle of stars. The golden ratio, phi, was not a discovery, but a gift, a signature of creation itself, taught directly to humanity by the gods. Under the patient gaze of their otherworldly teachers, students learned to see the universe as architecture. Every star in the sky, every stone in a temple, every curve of a river followed patterns that could be understood, mapped, and replicated. Knowledge was not separate from the sacred. To learn mathematics was to touch divinity. The sound chambers. Lessons often moved from classrooms into chambers designed to amplify vibration. Here, the young gathered in circles, their voices blending in chants. The gods explained that sound was the key to moving matter, healing flesh, and aligning the spirit. Children were encouraged to hum a single note until they felt the walls tremble slightly. The limestone chambers, inlaid with quartz, responded like living instruments. When the voices harmonized, the air itself shimmered. Teachers showed them how different tones could make sand dance in geometric patterns, revealing the hidden language of the cosmos. In this way, Egyptian children were not only taught music, but the science of resonance, a knowledge that would later lift stones, heal the sick, and carve inscriptions with perfect precision. The star lessons. At night, education continued beneath the heavens. Students were led onto temple roofs or open courtyards, where the gods themselves pointed toward constellations. Here, they would say, is Sirius, the dog star, our guide and beacon. Here is Orion, the hunter, the reflection of Osiris himself. Maps were drawn not on parchment, but in the sky. The gods explained the timing of floods, the cycles of crops, and the rhythm of human life as written in starlight. For the Egyptians, astronomy was not stargazing. It was survival, prophecy, and communion with home. Children memorized the skies as one memorizes a family tree. Every star had a name, a lineage, a purpose. To study the heavens was to know one's own origins, healing as knowledge. Medicine was not hidden away for priests alone. Students were shown the art of herbs, mint for the stomach, honey for wounds, lotus for the mind. But the gods expanded this knowledge with what they called vibrational healing. In resonance chambers, children learned to place their hands upon ailing animals, humming tones that aligned with the creature's heartbeat. They watched as fractures in bone knit faster, as fevers cooled, as exhaustion lifted. Healing was not only chemical but energetic. The body was an instrument, and illness was dissonance. Thus, Egyptian education fused science and spirit, showing that both worked together as one, a society built on learning. Knowledge was not hoarded by kings. Though pharaohs held authority, the gods insisted that learning flow widely, for a civilization without wisdom collapses. Scribes copied lessons onto scrolls, farmers learned the timing of the stars, and artisans perfected symmetry in their craft. From child to elder, learning was a daily ritual. Each Egyptian understood that to learn was to serve not only themselves, but the harmony of their people. The gods did not demand worship alone, they demanded growth. Reflection. Picture this: an Egyptian child, no older than 10, sitting cross-legged on cool temple stone, tracing hieroglyphs that hum faintly in the sunlight. Above them, a radiant teacher adjusts the child's hand, showing them the curve of a symbol. Around them, classmates chant, their voices making the air vibrate. Overhead, the constellations wait to be revealed in their proper time. This was daily life in Egypt when gods walked among men. A society where learning was not a privilege but the essence of being human, where children were not only students, but apprentices in the great art of creation itself. The story of Egypt was not only written in stone, but in the living soil. Each harvest, each loaf of bread, each amphora of beer, bore testimony to a partnership unlike any other, humanity guided by otherworldly beings who taught them how to turn the desert into paradise. The gift of the Nile. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt. Its floods brought black silt, fertile and rich, spreading across the land like a yearly blessing. Yet the Egyptians knew this was no accident of nature alone. The gods revealed to them how to read the river's pulse, the subtle tremors, the hidden currents, the whispers of stars that foretold its rise. While neighboring tribes guessed at seasons, Egypt measured them. Tall, elegant beings walked with farmers, showing how to carve channels that guided water evenly across fields. They marked the earth with geometry, ensuring irrigation reached every stalk of grain. The dikes and canals of Egypt were not crude trenches, but precise systems, tuned to balance flow like music in harmony. It was said that Osiris himself once pressed his radiant hand into the soil, and from it sprang the first stalk of barley. From that moment, farming became sacred. Every seed planted was an offering, every harvest a covenant between humanity and the divine. Tools of resonance, plows, sickles, and baskets filled the fields, but some tools were far beyond wood and bronze. At dawn, farmers gathered under the direction of their godly companions to activate devices that glowed faintly in the sun. These rods and discs hummed with resonance, loosening soil without touch, making planting effortless. Imagine a farmer guiding a wooden plow, while beside him a being of light lowers a staff into the earth. With a soft hum, the soil parts in perfect furrows. Seeds fall like rain into rows, covered instantly by another sweep of vibration. What took days in other lands was completed in hours. The harvest, too, was aided. Resonant blades glided across stalks, cutting grain cleanly without bruising. The air carried the sound of harmonics, as if the crops themselves sang while being gathered. Shared feasts. After labor came community. Egyptians did not toil only to survive. They celebrated to live. Once baskets brimmed with barley and emmer, once amphorae filled with sweet wine, the gods themselves joined in the feasts. Picture the great courtyards at sunset, fires crackling, bread rising in clay ovens, beer frothing in jars. Humans and gods sit side by side. The beings of otherworldly stature eat sparingly, preferring fruits, honey, and golden nectar from vessels that never seem to empty. Humans feast heartily. Roasted fish, figs, dates, olives, their laughter echoing against limestone walls. And when the food is gone, music begins. Lyres and drums beat rhythm, flutes sing high, and the gods contribute sounds not made by any human voice. Tones that vibrate through bone and blood, lifting hearts into joy. Dancers whirl, priests chant, children clap. It is not worship alone, but communion, a society where labor and feasting, toil and joy, belong to both species alike. Architecture in the fields. The same beings who taught the Egyptians to farm also raised granaries that gleamed like temples. These were not mere warehouses, but structures designed to preserve food for years. Stones hummed with cool resonance, keeping grain fresh, guarding it from rot and pests. Villages became wonders in themselves. Mud brick houses lined with limestone blocks carried inscriptions that tuned the air, keeping rooms cool in the desert heat. Roofs glistened with reflective powders provided by the gods, shielding families from the sun. Even the humblest home bore traces of divine craftsmanship. To step into an Egyptian village was to step into a harmony of human effort, amplified by otherworldly hands. The marketplaces. Beyond fields and homes lay the marketplaces. Here, humans and gods mingled in trade not only of goods, but of knowledge. Farmers laid out bundles of onions, garlic, and dates, while artisans displayed pottery, jewelry, and linen. Among them, radiant beings offered gifts from their world, glowing crystals, powders that healed wounds, rods that channeled sound. Trade was not measured only in silver or grain. It was measured in trust, in shared wisdom. A farmer might trade honey for a fragment of quartz that helped keep his hearth alight. A weaver might offer cloth for a drop of golden oil that never spoiled. Markets were alive with sound, the bartering voices of men, the deep, resonant tones of gods, the music of flutes and drums echoing over stalls. To walk through one was to see no barrier between species, only exchange. The philosophy of labor. Egyptians did not see work as burden. Labor was worship. To plow a field, to bake bread, to weave linen, was to honor the gods who gave them knowledge. Every task carried meaning. The gods themselves taught this philosophy. They explained that the universe was built on balance. For every harvest, there must be planting. For every feast, there must be labor. For every life, there must be death. Egyptians embraced this rhythm, and in doing so, built a culture where even the simplest acts, sowing seeds, drawing water, were sacred rituals. Reflection. Close your eyes and imagine the Nile at flood, black soil stretching to the horizon, farmers guiding glowing tools, while divine beings walk among them. Imagine the laughter of feasts, the hum of resonance filling the night, the mingling of species in markets alive with color and song. This was not myth. This was daily life in Egypt, a society where farming was guided by gods, where technology bent earth and sky, and where every loaf of bread carried the taste of eternity. In Egypt, a city was never just a collection of homes. It was a reflection of the heavens on earth, shaped by human hands, but guided by gods who knew how to bend matter, sound, and light. Every block of limestone, every column carved with glyphs, every towering obelisk was not merely architecture, but an act of communion, foundations of the impossible. To the outside world, Egypt's monuments would one day appear impossible. How could mortals raise stones weighing hundreds of tons, polish granite harder than steel, and align structures with pinpoint accuracy to the stars? But in the days when gods walked alongside men, these were not mysteries. They were daily practice. Cities were planned not by guesswork, but by geometry, taught directly by divine hands. Priests, scribes, and radiant beings stood together with chords, shadows, and crystals, mapping streets to mirror constellations, temples aligned perfectly with Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades. Not for show, but to tether energy from the cosmos itself into the heart of the city. Foundations were set upon resonance lines, where the earth's subtle vibrations rose strongest. The gods explained that energy moved beneath the soil like hidden rivers, and to build upon them was to awaken power. Thus, Egypt's greatest cities were not random settlements but instruments, vast machines of stone tuned to the harmonies of the earth and sky. The living stone. In quarries far from the city, workers labored, but not as slaves. They sang in rhythm, their chants harmonizing with devices held by the gods. These devices glowed, their crystalline cores releasing frequencies that softened stone, making it easier to carve. Large blocks floated as though lightened by invisible hands, moved effortlessly across sand. When set into place, the stones fused not with mortar, but with resonance. Each block was guided until its surfaces aligned so perfectly that air could not pass between them. Even today, millennia later, these joints remain tighter than any modern tool could achieve. Walls were carved not with chisels, but with beams of sound and light. The gods showed artisans how to channel energy into rods that etched symbols with flawless precision. The hieroglyphs we marvel at today were not just art. They were circuits, inscriptions that carried frequency and intent. Temples of energy. To step into an Egyptian temple was to step into a machine, alive with power. Columns were not merely supports. They were tuned pillars that captured vibration. Floors embedded with quartz amplified footsteps, sending subtle energy rippling through the hall. Ceilings mirrored constellations, their stars painted with materials that glowed faintly under starlight. Priests and gods alike activated these temples with sound. Chants echoed, drums pounded, and the air itself vibrated until walls hummed like struck crystal. Within these walls, the sick were healed, the crops blessed, and the people reminded that their lives were interwoven with the cosmos. Some temples were designed to store energy. Great halls collected sunlight by day, capturing it within crystalline inlays, and at night they glowed faintly, casting a soft golden hue upon the city. To the Egyptians this was not magic but life itself, a gift from their divine companions shared openly. Obelisks as antennas. Every city had its obelisks. Rising like frozen beams of sunlight, these monuments were not only symbols but instruments. The gods revealed that obelisks channeled energy from the heavens into the earth, and from the earth back to the heavens. They acted as bridges, resonant spires that harmonized frequencies across realms. When sunlight struck their tips of electrum or gold, they pulsed with unseen force, sending vibrations into the soil. Citizens could feel it faintly, a warmth, a hum beneath their feet. Farmers swore their crops grew stronger under the shadow of obelisks, while priests believed their chants carried farther, their prayers sharper. Obelisks were not decorations. They were power lines, each one tuned precisely to serve the city as both anchor and antenna, the homes of the people. Though the temples and pyramids dazzled, even the homes of ordinary Egyptians bore divine design. Mud brick walls were lined with limestone powder that kept them cool. Roofs were angled not just for shade, but to catch breezes flowing along planned channels of air. Streets were paved in deliberate grids, angled to funnel wind and water efficiently. Wells dug at precise points, tapped into aquifers, revealed by the gods, ensuring every district had fresh water. Within homes, hearths glowed with flames that never smoked, fed by oils infused with subtle energy. Lamps burned steadily, casting golden light upon walls painted with stars, animals and symbols, reminders that even in the humblest dwelling, divinity dwelled. Nightfall in the city. As the sun sank, cities transformed. The great temples glowed faintly, their crystalline inlays capturing the last rays of daylight. Obelisks shimmered, their golden tips reflecting the stars. Markets thrummed with sound, artisans selling jewelry that resonated with hidden energy, farmers exchanging grain beneath the watchful eyes of gods, and above it all, the sky itself became part of the city. Streets aligned with constellations so that at certain hours, starlight poured directly into temple gates, illuminating statues and sanctuaries. The people gasped, not in surprise but in reverence, for this was the order of the universe revealed in their very streets. Reflection. Close your eyes and walk with me through such a city. Stone walls humming softly, columns glowing faintly with light, obelisks rising like frozen sunbeams, gods and men moving side by side in streets designed to mirror the stars. Imagine the sound of chanting rising, the vibration settling into your bones, the night sky pouring its light into the heart of the city. This was Egypt not as a puzzle for the future to solve, but as a living civilization where technology, spirit, and architecture united seamlessly. A city not built to defy time, but to embody eternity. In Egypt, spirituality was not an hour of prayer, it was the atmosphere in which life unfolded. Every breath, every grain of bread, every sunrise and procession was part of a tapestry called Ma'at, the ever-balanced order that bound gods and humans in mutual care. Dawn service. Awakening the city. When the eastern horizon blushed with first light, temple gates opened like eyelids. Scribes, singers, and keepers of the sanctuary entered barefoot, stepping onto cool stone that remembered centuries of footsteps. Incense curls rose, sweet and resinous, winding into the rafters like written prayers. The city did not simply wake, it was awakened. In the innermost chamber, where the air felt dense with quiet, priests approached the veiled shrine. They did not feed a statue, they recalibrated a presence. The god's image, constructed with alloys and crystalline inlays, was an instrument. A veil lifted, a chant began, single note, then a chorus, then a soft harmonic the stone itself answered. The idol shivered faintly as etched circuits along its collar and headdress caught the sung frequencies. Light moved across the metal like water. A bowl of bread and a cup of beer were placed on a low table, not as crude offerings to hunger, but as symbols of reciprocity. As we nourish, so are we nourished, the chief reader intoned. The gods, beings of radiant physiology, did not eat as humans did. They touched a fingertip to the rim of the cup, and the liquid brightened, its surface rippling once. Later, that bread would be carried to the people, believed to carry harmony back into ordinary bodies. In Egypt, ritual was not distance, it was distribution. Household shrines, sanctuaries in miniature. Temples anchored the city, but devotion lived in kitchens. At dawn and dusk, doorways were swept, a small brazier lit, and a quiet greeting murmured to the household gods, protectors of threshold, grain, and sleep. Little niches held clay figures and a palm-sized disk of polished stone that caught sun and moon. A mother might hum the same note she used to soothe her child. The disk answered with a soft glow. Children learned to match tone to light before they mastered numbers. Water was poured 3 times into a clay basin, the first for the river, the second for the sky, the third for the breath between them. This was not superstition. The gods had taught that attention is energy. To notice the day was to feed the day. Festivals, the city as one body. Across the calendar, processions bound districts into a single heartbeat. On festival mornings, painted barges glided along canals, while priests lifted standards tipped with gold and electrum. The standards sang, an audible bell-like overtoning, whenever sun struck them at the correct angle. Streets became rivers of color. Bakers pulled seeded loaves shaped like fish, stars, and ankhs from glowing clay ovens. Children wore garlands of lotus that cooled the brow. The gods did not descend from the sky only to be watched from afar. They walked. Tall, radiant figures moved within the procession, their garments catching light like scales of dawn. They paused to bless infants, to lay long fingers on the shoulders of farmers, to exchange a few words with elders whose memories were libraries. At the high moment, a shared refrain rose. The city sang one note. Birds startled from fig trees, circled once, and settled again, as if trees and wings and citizens were tuned to the same invisible pitch. At night, festival courtyards transformed into open classrooms. Resonance tables displayed moving sand that arranged itself into star-symmetric patterns with each drumbeat. Dancers traced those patterns with chalk as musicians shifted tempo, teaching through feet what minds would forget. This was Egypt's pedagogy, learn by living, oracles, and the art of listening. When a question pressed, should we open the canal early? Is the patient strong enough for surgery? Petitioners entered the Hall of Echoes. Here, walls were thick with limestone, seeded with quartz. A god and 2 human listeners sat within a ring etched on the floor. No one spoke at first. The listeners breathed together until the room itself seemed to breathe. Cool air in, warm air out. Only then came the question, spoken plainly. The reply did not thunder. It arrived as a coordinated perception, a shift in air pressure, a tightening of the skin, a tone at the edge of hearing. The god articulated what both listeners had felt. The answer belonged to all 3. Judgment was never a tyrant's decree. It was a triad, divine, human, and place. Healing as retuning. Egyptian medicine had 2 speeds, herb and harmony. In the herb rooms, pestles crushed mint, fennel, myrrh, and willow. Honey sealed wounds with antimicrobial sweetness. In the resonance wards, patients reclined on alabaster benches, warmed from beneath by low, steady frequencies. Priests and healers, women and men alike, stood at the head and feet and hummed tones mapped to breath rate and pulse. Lungs loosened, spines untwisted, fever lines softened. When bone needed setting, light rods traced patterns around the fracture. A faint ozone scent rose as marrow responded. Afterward, the patient sipped barley broth infused with lotus to calm the mind, for fear is a powerful dissonance. Families waited in shaded courtyards, reading aloud simple hymns that stabilized their own breathing. Healing was never a single act. It was an environment. The weighing before sleep. Egyptians rehearsed eternity nightly. Before bed, a simple practice. Sit, recount the day, and name where one kept or slipped from Ma'at. Not to self-accuse, but to retune. A scale charm, tiny feather and copper heart, hung by the bed. The feather was touched first, then the chest. Light heart, clear path, murmured elders to children. Dreams, they believed, were corridors. One slept to walk them wisely. Temples held incubation rooms, where the troubled could spend a night under guided sound, waking with counsel remembered, as if whispered from a familiar doorway. The gods said dreams were the language of parts of the self that did not speak in daylight. Egypt listened. Work as worship. At dawn, workers filed through threshold courts before entering workshops. A short chorus, 3 notes, woke the hall. Tools hung from pegs, copper chisels that rang true when tapped, measuring cords knotted to sacred ratios, light rods wrapped in linen when not in use. A foreman, always a master craftsperson, never a taskmaster, assigned tasks as if casting roles in a choir, stone whisperers to the quarry, line readers to layout, polishers to the final pass. Midday, everyone stopped, not for idleness, but for recentering. A bowl of dates and flatbread circulated. Water was poured, hands rinsed, eyes closed. 5 shared breaths later, hammers resumed. The gods insisted. Quality requires intervals. The result was not only precision, it was joy left in the work like fragrance in cloth. Death as continuance. Funerary practice was not denial, it was logistics for a known journey. Bodies were tended with chemistry learned from centuries of experiment, resins, salts, and oils in proportions adjusted by season, so that form could teach the next generation long after voice fell silent. Tomb chapels held star maps and food formulas because memory belongs to the living. In the chapel of returning words, families recited the names of the departed to keep pathways bright. A god sometimes stood quietly in the back, head bowed, not to receive honors, but to witness human love, practicing the highest art of Ma'at, continuity. Nightfall. The city exhales. Evening pooled in colonnades, torches hissed alive, the desert gave up its heat. On rooftops, families shared soup and story. In courtyards, a lone flute stitched neighbors into a listening circle. Across the river, fields sighed, canals ticking softly as shutters closed. In the high precincts, a last vibration rolled through the temple like a tide, and the sanctum dimmed to starlight. The gods withdrew, not far, never far, only enough to let the city keep its own rhythm. Egypt slept as a tuned instrument, ready for the next note at dawn. In Egypt, celebration was not a break from life, it was life amplified. The great festivals of the Nile were not diversions, they were the arteries of culture, the proof that gods and humans shared not only labor and ritual, but joy. The rhythm of the calendar. Every season bore its sacred timing. The rising of Sirius, the heliacal dawn star, signaled the flood and the renewal of fields. The winter solstice marked the rebirth of Ra's strength. Equinoxes balanced light and dark, reminding the people of Ma'at. Festivals flowed with these cosmic rhythms. They were not optional amusements, but essential recalibrations of the city's heart. The gods themselves decreed them, insisting that joy was as necessary as irrigation, as vital as grain. Preparation. Days before a festival, the air changed. Markets swelled with color as stalls overflowed with figs, pomegranates, and jars of honey. Looms clattered with fresh linen dyed in indigo and saffron. Scribes painted banners with glyphs that glowed faintly when struck by torchlight. Temples prepared differently. Resonance chambers were tuned, obelisks polished, sacred boats repaired. Priests fasted lightly, cleansing body and mind to serve as clear vessels. Children rehearsed songs until their voices blended like reeds in the river wind. And in the high courtyards, gods watched with serene patience, their luminous eyes reflecting the bustle. They did not correct the people's preparations, they encouraged them. Celebration was an act of human creativity. The gods were guests as much as participants. Procession of light. When the day arrived, drums began at dawn, deep pulsing beats echoing across limestone walls. Trumpets fashioned from electrum carried notes so pure they shimmered like sunlight in air. The procession unfurled like a river of brilliance. Priests bore standards tipped with gold, their tops catching the sun and refracting light into beams that lanced across the streets. Children scattered lotus petals, filling the air with fragrance. Dancers painted in ochre and white moved in spirals, echoing star patterns taught by the gods. And then came the divine. Tall beings in garments of woven brilliance walked at the center, their presence commanding awe, yet radiating gentleness. Some carried rods humming softly with resonance, amplifying the music until the very ground seemed to pulse. Citizens cheered, not as subjects, but as companions in a shared joy. The sacred boats. No festival was complete without the sacred barges. Great wooden ships adorned with gilded prows floated down canals, their hulls resonating with chants. Priests stood aboard, holding crystalline orbs that caught sunlight and cast shimmering patterns onto the water. As barges drifted, gods raised their hands and light bent around them, casting arcs like rainbows across the crowd. To the people, this was not spectacle but reassurance, proof that balance endured, that the covenant between heaven and earth remained intact. Feasting together. When the processions ended, feasting began. Courtyards overflowed with bread, roasted goose, grilled fish, and sweet cakes drenched in honey. Beer foamed in clay mugs, wine poured from amphorae. The gods partook sparingly, preferring nectar from vessels they brought with them, shimmering liquid that never diminished, shared in drops with honored elders and children. Those who tasted described it as both flavor and music, a sweetness that sang in the bones. Humans laughed, danced, and embraced. Gods stood among them, smiling softly, their radiant forms glowing in firelight. Music rose higher, drums and flutes intertwining with tones produced by rods and crystals carried by the gods. The combined sound lifted the crowd into ecstasy, night of the stars. As night deepened, torches dimmed, and attention turned upward. The sky over Egypt was an open cathedral, every star sharp against desert air. Priests pointed to Orion and Sirius, narrating stories of Osiris and Isis. Children lay on rooftops, tracing constellations with their fingers. Gods stood among them, confirming with a nod or gesture that the stories were not fables but memories. Temples released beams of light from their crystalline inlays, aligning with constellations in real time. Columns vibrated softly, and the entire city seemed to breathe with the sky. For one night, humanity felt itself woven directly into the cosmos. Renewal. Festivals ended not with exhaustion, but with renewal. People returned to their homes carrying bread, blessed in the temple, oil infused with resonance, or a flower touched by a god's hand. These tokens were not souvenirs, but reminders that joy was sacred. The gods themselves withdrew quietly at dawn, returning to their sanctuaries. Yet their presence lingered, woven into the very rhythm of laughter and song echoing across the Nile. Reflection. Picture this. Thousands gathered in white linen, torches flickering, gods and humans walking together beneath a canopy of stars. Music ripples like water. Food passes from hand to hand. Light bends and dances at the touch of radiant beings. For a single night, the world is whole, harmonious, radiant. This was not legend. This was Egypt, a civilization where celebration was communion and joy was as sacred as stone. To live in Egypt under the guidance of gods was to live in a laboratory of the cosmos. Knowledge was not locked away, but breathed into daily life, carried in tools, woven into walls, etched into papyrus scrolls. Technology and spirituality were not separate domains. They were one. The energy of resonance. The most fundamental science was resonance. Every apprentice learned early that the universe vibrated, that frequency governed form. The gods demonstrated how a single tone could shift the weight of stone, how chords could cleanse water, how harmonics could weave invisible threads between body and spirit. In the halls of research, quartz blocks hummed beneath beams of light. Priests in linen robes and beings of radiant stature worked side by side, adjusting rods until a vibration matched the pitch of the stone. With a soft glow, granite lifted from the ground. This was not magic. It was physics as understood by a species far older and wiser than mankind. Healing through vibration. Resonance was also medicine. Physicians carried small tuning forks carved from bronze and crystal. When struck, they produced tones that vibrated through the body, realigning organs, accelerating recovery. Some rods emitted beams of invisible force that stitched bone. Others tuned blood to a healthier rhythm. Patients reclined in alabaster halls where walls glowed faintly with embedded crystals. Priests sang notes that synchronized with these crystals, creating fields of harmony around the body. The gods monitored quietly, intervening when necessary with tools too advanced for human replication. Illness was never treated as an enemy to destroy, but as dissonance to resolve. The power of light. The Egyptians knew light as more than illumination. Through the guidance of their celestial companions, they learned how to bend, focus, and harness it. Mirrors of polished copper and electrum were aligned across temple courtyards, channeling beams into chambers where carvings shimmered with sudden clarity. Some temples contained shafts lined with crystalline inlays. When the sun reached a precise angle, beams traveled the length of the shaft and ignited chambers with brilliance brighter than 100 torches. At night, rods held by priests glowed with soft, steady radiance, powered not by oil but by the captured essence of starlight itself. Water as conduit. Beneath the cities, channels carried not only water, but energy. The gods taught that flowing water generated subtle currents, and when paired with resonance, those currents could be magnified. Wells dug at certain points became not just sources of drinking water, but hubs of power, sustaining the vibrational systems of the temples. It is why the Nile was revered as sacred. More than a river, it was a living artery of both life and energy, connecting the land to the cosmic rhythms of the heavens. Mathematics as sacred code. Numbers were not abstractions. They were living principles. The priests inscribed them into walls, measured them in the shadows of obelisks, chanted them in hymns. The gods showed that every ratio reflected a universal pattern: the spiral of seashells, the curve of galaxies, the growth of plants. Builders used these numbers to shape temples that never echoed harshly, pyramids that held their weight perfectly, and passageways that amplified whispers into roars. Geometry was not simply for architects. It was a language spoken between man, God, and cosmos. Astronomy as memory. Every Egyptian knew the stars not only as lights but as ancestors. The gods identified each constellation as a home, a lineage, a point of origin. Orion was the throne of Osiris, Sirius the beacon of Isis. The Pleiades were sisters, guardians of fertility and renewal. From this knowledge came calendars precise enough to predict floods, eclipses, and seasons. Farmers planted with confidence, sailors navigated without fear. Priests foretold eclipses as if reading a scroll in hand. The heavens were not remote. They were a library always open. The libraries of Egypt. Hidden within temples were great repositories of scrolls. These were not simply histories but manuals of science, diagrams of energy devices, instructions for resonance healing, records of star paths. Humans copied tirelessly, knowing that to preserve knowledge was as holy as worship. The gods contributed not only instruction, but artifacts. Some scrolls were written on materials that never decayed, their symbols glowing faintly as if alive. Others contained diagrams so intricate they seemed incomprehensible, left as seeds for future generations to unlock. Technology in daily life. Even outside temples, remnants of these sciences appeared in households. Lamps burned with steady golden light, fueled not only by oil, but by powders that enhanced combustion. Millstones hummed faintly as resonance guided their turning, easing the burden of grinding grain. Linen garments were treated with subtle energies that made them cooler under the desert sun. The people may not have understood the full principles, but they lived within a web of unseen science that improved every aspect of their existence. If science was the skeleton of Egypt, then art was its skin. In the days when gods and men worked together, creation itself was a sacred act. From towering monuments to the smallest amulet, every work bore the fingerprints of both species, fusing the imagination of humans with the knowledge of beings from beyond. The workshop of the gods. In cities like Memphis and Thebes, entire quarters were devoted to artisanship. From dawn until dusk, hammer and chisel rang out. But they were not alone. Among the Egyptians moved figures taller and more radiant, guiding hands, adjusting angles, showing mortals how to coax perfection from stone and metal. Imagine a workshop lit not only by torches but by soft orbs of light hovering in the air, illuminating every detail without smoke. Tables lined with copper tools sat beside instruments gifted by the gods. rods that could etch granite as easily as clay, crystals that sharpened blades endlessly without wear, and powders that fused pigments so they never faded. Here, humans learned how to turn raw stone into living statues, how to carve falcons that seemed ready to soar, how to fashion thrones that shimmered like sunrise. Jewelry of light, Egyptian jewelry dazzled not only for its beauty, but for its subtle power. Goldsmiths shaped the metal into ankhs, scarabs, and lotus blossoms, while divine beings infused them with resonance fields invisible to the eye. A necklace was not only ornament, it balanced the wearer's body. A ring carried protection not through symbol alone, but through energy woven into its alloy. Some gems glowed faintly in darkness, absorbing starlight during the day and releasing it softly at night. Turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli were polished to perfection, their colors intensified by treatments unknown to modern chemistry. A queen's diadem sparkled, not merely with wealth, but with harmonics that calmed the heart and sharpened the mind. Stone made alive. The colossal statues of pharaohs, the serene visages of gods carved into cliffs, the guardians of temples, all were wrought with precision still unmatched. Granite blocks the size of houses were shaped until their surfaces shone like mirrors. Humans wielded chisels of copper for finishing, but the initial carving was often achieved with divine tools, handheld emitters that sliced through stone with streams of focused energy. The gods demonstrated and artisans imitated, blending technique and devotion. When statues were complete, priests and divine beings conducted rituals, not of superstition, but of activation. Sound, light, and touch merged until the stone seemed almost alive. Visitors swore they felt the statues watching them, breathing faintly. The great monuments. Of all Egypt's works, none surpassed the monuments, the pyramids, the temples, the colossal complexes aligned with the stars. Humans provided labor, devotion, and sheer persistence. The gods provided knowledge of geometry, energy, and methods of lifting unimaginable weight. Together, they raised pyramids, whose sides aligned with cardinal directions to a precision within fractions of a degree. Temples mirrored constellations, each one a bridge between heaven and earth. The process was no miracle. It was cooperation. Stones were cut in quarries with beams of force, floated into place by fields that negated their mass, and set with such precision that even millennia could not shake their fit. The gods insisted these monuments were not tombs, but machines of eternity. They amplified the harmony of the land, recorded the lineage of stars, and reminded every Egyptian that their lives were part of something eternal. The intimate crafts. Not all artistry was monumental. Families filled their homes with delicate amulets, wooden carvings, linen dyed in radiant hues. Children were given toys carved from ivory, painted with symbols that encouraged courage or wisdom. The gods did not scorn these small works. They often visited the workshops of humble artisans, offering subtle improvements. A potter might be shown how to fire clay in a kiln lined with crystalline powder that hardened vessels beyond fracture. A weaver might be given a drop of shimmering oil that preserved colors through decades. Egyptian artistry was not divided between high and low. All craft, from pyramid to pendant, bore the same sacred impulse to bring form from formlessness, to echo the eternal through human hands. City as canvas. The cities themselves became artworks. Streets were painted with murals of harvests and hunts, their pigments glowing faintly under starlight. Columns were etched with spirals that caught shadows at dawn and midday, creating patterns that shifted with the sun. Even marketplaces were designed as living galleries, their stalls woven with fabrics that shimmered like liquid, their clay jars patterned with symbols that seemed to move when viewed from different angles. Art was not confined to galleries. It was everywhere, woven into daily life. Egyptians lived within a masterpiece, each brick and brushstroke a collaboration between human devotion and divine knowledge. Transition. And yet, all this artistry, every jewel, every statue, every monument, was not created for beauty alone. Behind the surface shimmered deeper functions: energy, memory, eternity. For the Egyptians, art was never separate from purpose. Their temples were machines, their statues conduits, their jewelry living tools. This brings us into the heart of Egyptian spirituality, where gods and humans not only built together, but prayed, healed, and dreamed together, binding the physical and spiritual worlds into one seamless whole. In Egypt, to live was to worship, not through fear or blind obedience, but through daily recognition that life itself was sacred. The gods were not distant overseers perched on unreachable thrones. They walked among the people, their presence constant, their guidance shaping every gesture of human devotion. Ma'at, the balance of all things. At the center of Egyptian spirituality was Ma'at, the principle of balance, truth, and order. It was not only a law, but a living reality. Every act, planting a seed, carving a block, sharing a meal, was measured against Ma'at. To act in harmony was to strengthen the bond between worlds. The gods, radiant beings who cohabited with humanity, embodied this principle. They reminded the Egyptians that chaos was always near. The desert just beyond the river, the night just beyond the dawn, dissonance always waiting at the edges of harmony. Spirituality was the practice of keeping the balance strong. The role of temples. Temples were not simply places to pray, they were living engines of spirituality. Their walls glowed faintly at sunrise, their sanctums pulsed with quiet power. Priests entered at dawn not to beg favors, but to recalibrate the city. By lighting incense, by chanting tones that vibrated in unison, they synchronized people, place, and cosmos. Ordinary citizens visited for guidance. Farmers asked for blessings on their crops. Artisans requested clarity before beginning a new work. Each prayer was answered in subtle ways: a nod from a god, a vibration felt in the chest, a sudden knowing in the mind. The gods themselves participated. They stood beside priests, raising hands as energy shifted. A mortal's chant and a god's resonance combined, creating waves of harmony that spread outward, touching every street and home. Personal devotion. Beyond the grand temples, each household carried its own sanctity. Shrines to Bastet, Hathor, or Thoth adorned corners of homes. A mother lit a lamp of perfumed oil and whispered thanks for her child's health. A craftsman placed a token of bread near a small idol before beginning his work. But these were not empty rituals. The gods sometimes visited unannounced, stepping through a doorway, placing a hand on a child's head, or quietly observing a family meal. To Egyptians, this was natural. Their gods lived among them, and personal devotion was as much about relationship as reverence. Ritual of renewal. One of the most common ceremonies was the ritual of renewal, performed at the change of seasons. At sunrise, entire communities gathered in open courtyards. Priests led them in chants that rose like waves. Children released doves into the sky, symbolizing the flight of order into the year ahead. The gods walked at the center, their radiant forms shimmering in the dawn light. They touched bowls of water, which glowed briefly before being sprinkled over the crowd. To be touched by that water was to be renewed, cleansed of imbalance. People left feeling lighter, steadier, ready to carry harmony back into their homes and fields. Dreams and the divine. Spirituality extended into the night. Egyptians believed dreams were corridors where gods and mortals conversed. In incubation chambers, petitioners lay upon stone benches, lulled by low chants and the faint glow of walls embedded with quartz. Sleep came swiftly, and dreams unfolded with clarity. Sometimes a god appeared directly, offering counsel or warning. Other times, the dream showed symbols: a falcon for strength, a lotus for renewal, a scarab for transformation. Upon waking, priests and scribes helped interpret the message. For the Egyptians, dreams were not fantasy, but dialogue. Festivals of the spirit. Festivals were not only feasts and music, they were spiritual recalibrations for the entire nation. The festival of Apet, for example, united Karnak and Luxor in a procession that mirrored the journey of the gods along the Nile. Sacred boats carried statues, but those statues were not inert. They were conduits, radiating energy that washed over the people. Citizens sang and danced, not as entertainment, but as participation in the cosmic order. Every laugh, every drumbeat, every offering of bread was a reinforcement of Ma'at, judgment in life and death. Spirituality guided Egyptians not only in life, but in preparation for death. They believed that upon leaving the body, the heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. But because gods and humans coexisted openly, this was not an abstract idea. It was a daily practice. At night, families recited their actions of the day. They named where they upheld balance and where they faltered. This was not guilt, but honesty, a nightly rehearsal of judgment. Thus, when true judgment came, the soul was already practiced, already aligned. Transition. In every temple, in every household, in every dream, the presence of the gods infused Egyptian life with purpose. Spirituality was not an escape from the world, but the rhythm that held it together. And just as spirituality shaped the people, it also shaped their greatest monuments. For to the Egyptians, building was prayer made permanent, stone set into harmony with the eternal. The face of Egypt was carved into eternity by stone. Wherever the Nile wound its silver thread, its banks were crowned by monuments that defied time. Temples, pylons, and colossal statues announced to the desert that here dwelt not mortals alone, but a people who built with the gods themselves. Pyramids as engines of eternity. The pyramids rose not as tombs for kings, but as living structures. Each was designed with precision, impossible for human hands alone. The gods provided knowledge of stellar alignment, instructing masons to place each corner along the cardinal points. The angle of each side mirrored celestial mathematics, turning the pyramid into a replica of the heavens upon the earth. Construction was a harmony of species. Humans quarried the stone, their chants carrying rhythm through the air. Gods directed the placement, their tools bending gravity, making massive blocks light as though filled with breath. Each stone set into place hummed faintly, as if locking into resonance with its neighbors. Inside, passageways ran, not randomly, but with design. Shafts open to Orion's belt and to Sirius, allowing starlight to strike deep chambers at precise moments of the year. The structure itself became a dialogue with the sky, the Sphinx, and guardianship. Beside the pyramids crouched the Great Sphinx, its leonine body and human face symbolizing the bond between man and God. Legends whispered that its eyes once glowed at night, lit by crystalline cores placed by the gods. It watched the horizon tirelessly, guardian of the passage between realms. For Egyptians, to stand before the Sphinx was to feel seen, not by stone, but by eternity itself. The gods explained that guardians like the Sphinx anchored stability, keeping chaos at bay. Humanity carved the form, but divine knowledge guided every proportion, ensuring its gaze met both the rising sun and the star paths beyond. Temples as star maps. Temples like Karnak and Luxor were not simply houses of worship. They were precise star maps carved into stone. Every column represented constellations. Every wall bore glyphs that doubled as mathematical formulae. At dawn, light entered sanctuaries through narrow corridors, illuminating statues at exact astronomical alignments. The gods themselves stood with the people during these events, reminding them that the structure was not metaphor, it was machine. Light, sound, and stone combined to generate harmony across the city. The people understood their temples as open books, each wall a page in the language of the cosmos. To walk through one was to step inside a living text. Colossi of memory, colossal statues dotted the land, some reaching heights that dwarfed the tallest human dwellings. Each was cut from stone as hard as granite, shaped into likenesses of rulers and gods. But more than portraits, they were memory banks. When touched, some hummed faintly, vibrations echoing through the chest of the listener. The gods revealed that within the stone were patterns, records of voices, histories, knowledge encoded in frequencies. To sit beside a statue was to commune with memory itself. Travelers reported hearing tones in the night as wind struck the statues. Locals knew it was no accident. The statues were designed to sing. Cities of stone and light, entire cities grew from these monuments. Streets aligned to pyramids, markets clustered near temple gates. Homes spread in careful grids that mirrored star patterns above. Even the most modest village bore elements of divine architecture. Wells dug at precise energy points, walls angled to catch desert winds, rooftops painted with star glyphs that glowed faintly under moonlight. The gods instructed that every building, from palace to bakery, contribute to harmony. A city was not chaos of structures. It was a single composition, each wall a note in a greater chord. Obelisks as bridges. Throughout Egypt rose obelisks, monolithic spires of granite capped with shining tips of gold. These were not symbols alone. The gods designed them as bridges between earth and sky. At dawn, sunlight struck their tips, sending energy downward into the ground. At dusk, they released that same energy upward, rejoining the heavens. Priests maintained rituals at their bases, chanting tones that resonated up the shafts. At night, some claimed to see faint light shimmering from their tips, a sign that the obelisks were alive with current. Eternal collaboration. To an outsider, Egypt's monuments might appear as miracles of brute labor. To those who lived there, they were reminders of a deeper truth. Humans and gods were partners in creation. Every block of stone was a covenant, every wall an echo of the cosmos. For the Egyptians, the monuments were not meant to astonish future generations. They were built to bind heaven and earth into one continuous order, structures of forever, still standing long after voices have fallen silent. To the Egyptians, the gods were not unseen mysteries. They walked among them, flesh gleaming, eyes bright with otherworldly light. Their presence was constant, in temples, in workshops, in palaces, even in the streets of commoners. The Nile was not only the lifeline of Egypt, it was the meeting place of two species, human and divine. Forms of the divine. The gods were not uniform. Some towered over mortals, their bodies tall and slender, their skin shimmering as if layered with bronze or gold. Others bore features that mingled animal and human, not as symbols, but as actual physiology. Falcon-headed, jackal-faced, ibis-eyed. They were not disguises. These were their true forms, a diversity of species who had come from elsewhere. The people accepted this not as strange, but as natural. Children grew up watching radiant beings stride through markets. Farmers saw tall, falcon-headed figures inspecting canals. Priests bowed as luminous-eyed beings entered sanctuaries. For Egyptians, divinity was not invisible. It was a neighbor. The cohabitation of daily life. At feasts, gods and men ate together. The radiant beings consumed strange nectars that shimmered in crystal cups, while humans feasted on bread, fish, and figs. In workshops, artisans worked beside gods who demonstrated techniques with tools that glowed and hummed. At night, when torches flickered across city walls, the gods strolled openly through streets, offering counsel, blessing children, reminding mortals of their presence. Egypt was not ruled by gods in absentia, it was lived in partnership. To be Egyptian was to share your city with beings from the stars, the gift of knowledge. The gods gave generously, not in secret, but in plain instruction. They taught humans how to read the stars not only for agriculture, but for navigation across seas and deserts. They explained mathematics not as an invention, but as a reflection of the universe's structure. They revealed architecture as resonance, healing as frequency, and stone as memory. What humans discovered by toil, the gods confirmed with mastery. The partnership did not erase human effort, it magnified it. Every farmer, every artisan, every scribe was elevated, their work infused with divine technique. Alien technology in the land of the Nile. The most wondrous gift of the gods was their technology. They brought devices that defied human comprehension, yet blended seamlessly into daily life. Gravity rods. Carried by priests under the gods' guidance, these handheld devices bent the pull of the earth, making heavy stones float lightly into place. Healing chambers. Temple sanctums contained slabs of glowing stone where patients reclined, while harmonics washed through their bodies, repairing tissue and bone in hours rather than months. Light orbs. Hovering spheres illuminated courtyards without fire or oil, casting steady brilliance across workshops and homes. star maps. In crystalline tablets, constellations shifted in real time, showing the heavens with accuracy still unmatched. Farmers used them to predict floods, sailors to cross open seas. Sound weapons, rarely displayed but remembered in whispers, rods that emitted blasts of vibration, capable of stunning or shattering. Used sparingly, only when order faltered. These were not secrets hidden in vaults. They were part of life, woven into Egypt's greatness. Politics of the gods. Pharaohs ruled, but they did not rule alone. A council of gods advised them, their voices carrying weight beyond any courtier. Pharaohs were chosen not only by lineage but by approval of these beings. Coronations involved not only crowns and scepters, but direct communion with radiant figures who placed their hands upon the new ruler's brow, binding human authority to divine sanction. This partnership gave Egypt stability unknown elsewhere. Other nations rose and fell in chaos. Egypt endured, guided by the hands of both man and God. Fear and awe. Not all was comfort. The presence of the gods carried awe so heavy it bordered on fear. When a falcon-headed being spread its wings in temple halls, shadows fell like thunder. When a luminous figure fixed its gaze upon a petitioner, the weight of eternity pressed into human bones. Egyptians lived in reverence, knowing their neighbors were not merely powerful. They were cosmic. And yet this awe did not breed resentment. It bred loyalty. To live in Egypt was to live in the center of the universe, chosen by the gods as partners in creation. Wonders beyond compare. Travelers from foreign lands marveled at what they saw. Stones heavier than mountains lifted effortlessly, temples glowing in the dark, statues that seemed alive. They carried tales home, but without context, those tales became myths. Only Egyptians understood that these were not miracles, not fables. They were the natural outcome of cohabiting with beings of the stars. Egypt's greatness was not only carved in stone or sung in festivals, it was protected. And though the Nile Valley was blessed with fertility and harmony, danger always pressed at its borders. Other tribes envied its abundance. Desert raiders, foreign kings, and restless neighbors tested its resilience. But unlike any other civilization, Egypt did not stand alone. The gods stood with them, the divine presence in war. When enemies massed at the edges of the desert, Egyptian scouts carried word back to the cities. Messengers ran through temple halls, and pharaohs convened with their divine counselors. The gods did not command armies from afar. They walked with soldiers into the dust and heat. Towering beings, luminous with otherworldly radiance, strode beside mortal warriors. Some carried rods that glowed like fire. Others raised shields that shimmered with energy fields invisible until struck by arrows, which splintered harmlessly against them. To an enemy, it was terrifying, to face not only men in linen armor and bronze, but figures of impossible size and light, striding as if war was no burden to them. Weapons beyond bronze. The Egyptians were skilled with bows, spears, and chariots, but in the days of divine cohabitation, they had more. Vibration rods. Carried by select warriors, these could release focused waves that knocked enemies from their feet, breaking lines without spilling blood. Energy shields. Small discs worn on the arm that unfolded into shimmering barriers, bending incoming projectiles away. Guided arrows. tips forged with alloys taught by the gods. Balanced so perfectly, they flew straighter and struck with devastating force. Chariots of light. Some chariots were outfitted with crystalline cores. Wheels seemed to glide rather than turn, covering ground swiftly across desert sands. These weapons did not replace human arms, they magnified them. Pharaohs insisted soldiers still train with bow and spear, for discipline was sacred. The gods agreed. Technology without mastery, they warned, would corrupt the heart. Discipline and ritual. Before battle, soldiers stood in long rows, linen kilts pressed, shields polished, bows strung. Priests moved among them, chanting Ma'at, aligning the ranks in balance. Gods stood at the head, raising hands in blessing. The air vibrated faintly, filling men with calm courage. Fear did not vanish, but it bent to order. Pharaohs themselves often took part. They were not generals in tents, but warriors in chariots, crowned and armored, driving directly into the fray under divine protection. Their presence inspired the army, for if the ruler risked his life, so too would every soldier. The battlefields. Clashes erupted on the fringes of empire, in the desert passes of Sinai, along the fertile borders of Nubia, near the Mediterranean coast. Dust rose, arrows whistled, bronze clashed, but the tide was always shifted by divine presence. A single being of radiant form could scatter enemy ranks by walking through them unharmed. An energy rod raised skyward could unleash a sound that deafened and disoriented. Egyptian lines held firm, moving in precision, while enemies faltered in confusion. Stories tell of a battle where a god spread great wings of light across the field, casting shadow over enemy soldiers until they broke in terror. Another speaks of a river boiling suddenly as hostile ships approached, turned back by a divine command that stirred the waters. Mercy in victory. Though Egypt wielded immense power, it did not crush needlessly. Enemies who surrendered were often spared, brought back as laborers or integrated into society. The gods insisted that war's purpose was not annihilation, but preservation of Ma'at. Balance must be restored, not drowned in chaos. Captured leaders were paraded through cities not as broken slaves, but as warnings. Egyptians did not delight in humiliation. They displayed the cost of disorder. Then, often, those leaders were allowed to live, bound to treaties that acknowledged Egypt's superiority. Fear beyond borders. To neighboring nations, Egypt seemed untouchable. Word spread of their weapons, their radiant guardians, their monuments that no army could topple. Traders whispered of chariots that glided like shadows, of arrows that never missed, of gods themselves walking the battlefield. Some kingdoms sought alliances, sending gifts and emissaries. Others hardened their envy, plotting in secret. But all agreed, Egypt was not to be taken lightly, the dual edge of power. Yet divine weapons carried a burden. Soldiers who wielded them felt awe and fear in equal measure. To hold a rod that could knock down a wall was to hold a fragment of the god's own power. Strict laws governed their use. Only certain warriors, trained by priests and watched by gods, were permitted. Pharaohs feared corruption. The gods warned that balance could tip if humans sought domination for its own sake. And so Egypt walked a narrow line, powerful beyond all rivals, yet always reminded by their divine companions that power was responsibility, not license, legacy of defense. In time, stories of these battles blurred into myths. Later generations spoke of Ra striking enemies with sunlight, of Horus hurling falcons from the sky, of Osiris raising rivers to drown armies. But in the era of cohabitation, these were not myths, they were memories, real accounts of wars fought with gods at men's sides. Egypt stood strong not by bronze and chariots alone, but by the guardianship of beings who shared their strength, their knowledge, and their will to preserve order in the world. If Egypt's fields were nourished by the Nile, its throne was nourished by the presence of gods. The political order was not merely human invention, it was the result of a partnership between pharaohs and other worldly beings, whose wisdom reached beyond stars. Coronation in the presence of the divine. When a new pharaoh ascended, the ceremony was not symbolic. It was literal unification of human and divine authority. The candidate, often trained since childhood in sacred schools, stood before a council of radiant beings within the great halls of Karnak. One god, tall, with falcon eyes that glimmered like obsidian, placed a hand upon the young ruler's brow. Another, luminous in form, touched the shoulders. A third traced a circle in the air, a pattern of light that settled into the candidate's chest. Only then did the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt descend. It was not only regalia, it was a conduit, an instrument designed with divine knowledge, laced with alloys unknown elsewhere. Once placed, it attuned the pharaoh's mind to the resonance of the land, connecting ruler, people, and gods into one living circuit. The Council of Balance. Pharaohs did not rule alone. They sat within a council of balance, composed of human scribes, priests, and viziers, joined always by divine beings. Meetings were not whispers in secret chambers, but grand assemblies in halls that echoed with authority. Human scribes presented records of harvest, taxes, and trade. Priests reported on rituals, omens, and the harmony of Ma'at. The gods spoke last, their voices calm but weighty, offering counsel drawn from knowledge of cycles written in stars and laws of worlds unseen. Disagreements occurred, but not chaos. Egyptians believed the council mirrored the cosmos. Sun and moon, day and night, human and divine, all balancing one another. The pharaoh's task was to choose with wisdom, a choice legitimized by both man and God. Laws as living harmony. Egyptian law was not a list of punishments. It was alignment with Ma'at. Theft, murder, betrayal, all were seen as dissonance, disruptions in the great rhythm of order. Judges sat in open courts, priests humming tones of balance while listening to disputes. Gods sometimes attended, their luminous eyes fixed upon the accused. Lies withered beneath such stares. Truth rang clear. Punishment was not vengeance, but correction. Thieves returned goods with offerings of grain to the temples. Those who sowed discord were required to labor in public works, their hands rebuilding what they had disturbed. In rare cases of grave offense, exile to the desert was decreed, removal from the harmony they had broken. The gods insisted. Justice was restoration, not destruction. Law was medicine for the soul of the nation. Governance of resources. The Nile's abundance demanded management. Canals required constant care. Granaries needed organization. Temples consumed offerings, and armies required sustenance. These tasks were overseen by human administrators, but under the watchful presence of divine advisors. The gods taught new methods of record-keeping. Tablets of crystalline material recorded tallies in symbols that glowed faintly, devices humans could read but not replicate. These records ensured no corruption, no missing measure of grain. When disputes arose over water or harvest shares, divine presence resolved them quickly. A god would appear in the council chamber, lay out facts with calm clarity, and silence all quarreling. Their impartial authority prevented chaos before it could spread. Foreign relations. Egypt's neighbors knew that diplomacy with Egypt was diplomacy with gods. Envoys from Nubia, Mesopotamia, and beyond arrived bearing gifts, awed by the sight of radiant beings standing beside the pharaoh. Treaties were sealed not only with ink, but with divine symbols traced in the air, visible to all, binding both sides with weight no mortal dared break. When enemies faltered, they surrendered swiftly, realizing that Egypt's strength lay not only in armies, but in its alliance with powers beyond earth. Education of rulers. Pharaohs were not pampered monarchs. From youth, they were instructed by gods themselves. They learned astronomy from those who had crossed the stars, mathematics from beings who embodied proportion, ethics from advisors who had seen civilizations rise and fall across galaxies. This education produced rulers not only of authority, but of wisdom. Even flawed pharaohs could not rule long without divine correction. Gods tolerated human weakness, but not arrogance that endangered Maat. Those who faltered were quietly removed, remembered in whispers but not honored. The palace as a nexus. Pharaoh's palaces were more than dwellings. They were nexuses of power, where human and divine met daily. Courtyards rang with music and laughter as children played under the watchful eyes of radiant guardians. Inner halls glowed with torches and orbs that floated silently, illuminating scrolls and maps. At night, the gods held council with the ruler in chambers lined with gold and electrum, ceilings painted to mirror the heavens. They traced star paths across the air, speaking of floods, harvests, and omens. Decisions that shaped the fate of millions were made here, guided by voices of both man and God. Legacy of the divine throne. Egypt's governance was not tyranny, it was harmony. Pharaohs reigned not as despots, but as bridges, binding mortal and divine. Laws reflected balance, courts reflected justice, councils reflected cosmic order. The world beyond Egypt marveled, whispered, envied, but could not rival a throne that was supported by the wisdom of two species. And so Egypt endured, century after century, its throne never collapsing, its power never waning, because it was not merely human rule. It was governance sanctified by gods who walked among men. For Egypt, the night sky was not only a tapestry of stars, it was a map, a memory, and a promise. Where other nations gazed upward in wonder, the Egyptians gazed upward in recognition. They were not guessing at the heavens, they were remembering them, guided by the very beings who had come from those constellations. Temples as observatories. The temples of Egypt were not only houses of worship, they were observatories. Stone corridors aligned precisely with solstices and equinoxes. Pillars framed the rising of Sirius, herald of the Nile's flood. Ceilings painted with stars mirrored the heavens, as if the roof itself were a fragment of the sky. But these alignments were not coincidence, they were instruction. The gods taught the builders how to set each stone, how to measure each angle, until the entire temple was a machine of the cosmos. Priests did not simply pray inside them, they studied. As beams of sunlight cut through sanctuaries, as stars appeared through carefully carved slits, they gathered knowledge that only the gods could have given. The cosmic lessons. The gods explained to the Egyptians that the universe was not chaos, but order. Each star was not a random light, but a sun, each sun surrounded by its own worlds. The constellations were not just patterns, they were signposts, landmarks in a vast ocean of space. Egyptians learned of Orion not only as a hunter, but as a destination. Sirius was not only a star, but a beacon of life. The Milky Way was not only a river of light, but a road across the heavens, traveled by the beings who now stood beside them. These lessons shaped myths that to us sound symbolic, but to the Egyptians were literal. Osiris did not become a star in metaphor. He returned to the star that was his origin. Horus was not only the falcon of the sky, he was kin to a species that descended from the heavens. Star maps and celestial tools. Within temple vaults, priests safeguarded crystalline tablets that displayed the heavens. Unlike papyrus scrolls, these were not drawn, but alive. Constellations shifted as the night advanced. Stars pulsed with brightness, as if mirroring their real-time glow. Scribes traced these maps, recording positions of stars with precision so accurate that modern astronomers are still astonished. Ships navigated seas by them. Farmers timed harvests. Pharaohs planned building projects to align with celestial rhythms, ensuring harmony between heaven and earth. And in hidden sanctuaries, deeper mysteries were kept, spheres that projected entire skies upon walls, showing constellations invisible to the naked eye. Priests called them the hidden stars. Gods called them home, the story of origin. The gods told Egyptians of their journey. They spoke of leaving distant stars where civilizations flourished, crossing the sea of darkness in vessels of light. They described worlds with twin suns, with skies of purple, with oceans of silver. But they did not claim superiority. They explained that life everywhere sought harmony, that Egypt was chosen not because humans were weak, but because they were ready. The Nile, they said, mirrored cosmic rivers. Its cycles reflected eternal laws. To dwell among the Egyptians was to dwell in balance. Thus, myths of creation were born, not as fables but as memory. The mound rising from primordial waters, the lotus blooming in first light, the gods stepping onto earth. These were poetic retellings of real arrival, stories encoded for future generations. Cosmic knowledge in daily life. Egyptians used cosmic wisdom, not as abstraction, but as daily guide. Midwives timed births by phases of the moon, believing children born under certain stars carried specific destinies. Farmers planted according to stellar alignments, trusting crops would thrive in resonance with the heavens. Architects raised obelisks that captured sunlight at precise moments, marking festivals that mirrored cosmic cycles. Pharaohs saw themselves as bridges not only between human and God, but between earth and cosmos. To rule was to keep heaven and earth aligned as much as it was to govern grain or war. Foreigners in awe, travelers from Greece, Mesopotamia, and later Rome, marveled at Egyptian star lore. They copied fragments, carried home myths, tried to interpret patterns, but they missed the essence, that Egyptians were not guessing. They were remembering. Thus, Foreign scribes wrote of gods sailing across skies in boats of light, of sun and moon battling daily, of souls traveling among stars. To them, these were stories. To Egyptians, they were truths encoded in image, simplified for those who could not bear the weight of full knowledge. The silence of the gods. Yet the gods were careful. They did not reveal everything. They spoke of cycles, not distances. They described worlds, not coordinates. They hinted at travel, not mechanics. They gave wisdom to elevate humanity, not overwhelm it. And so, Egyptians looked at the sky with reverence, aware that their companions had come from there, but still left with mystery enough to inspire awe. The heavens remained both familiar and unfathomable, a reminder that even with divine neighbors, the universe was larger than imagination, a civilization of the stars. In the end, Egypt was not only a river kingdom, but a cosmic nation. Its temples were aligned to suns and moons. Its myths were maps of stellar origin. Its rulers were sanctified not only by gods, but by stars themselves. Where others saw chaos in the sky, Egypt saw order, because they had been taught by those who traveled the heavens, those who descended into their cities, those who were worshipped as gods, but lived among them as kin. The stars were not distant. For Egypt, they were home. The marvels of Egypt were never accidents of ingenuity alone. They were the visible tip of a greater inheritance, knowledge and technology shared by otherworldly beings who walked among men. The pyramids, the obelisks, the statues that seemed eternal, these were not wonders of mere human endurance, but the fruits of collaboration between earthbound labor and celestial mastery. Power of the earth, harnessed by the sky. The gods taught Egyptians that the earth itself was alive with energy. Beneath the sands, currents of force flowed like hidden rivers. Left untapped, they slumbered. Guided, they could be drawn into stone, metal, and air. Thus, the temples and pyramids were not only monuments, they were energy conductors. Limestone captured, granite focused, quartz resonated. The great shafts of the pyramids were channels, pulling subtle currents upward until they surged in chambers where priests performed rites. By night, the pyramids pulsed faintly with unseen light. Travelers camped near them reported dreams more vivid than waking life, visions that left them trembling. The gods explained this was natural. The pyramids amplified thought, magnified will, brought the human mind closer to the divine frequency of the cosmos. Tools of precision. How could blocks weighing tons be moved so effortlessly? Not by brute force, but by tools that bent the pull of gravity itself. Small rods of gleaming metal were held by workers as chants rose in rhythm. The rods vibrated faintly, lifting stone as if it were wood. With careful gestures, blocks floated into place, set down with precision, so exact a knife could not slip between them. Artisans, too, received gifts of craft. Copper chisels could not carve granite into statues with perfect polish, but under the hum of crystalline blades provided by the gods, stone yielded like clay. Obelisks were cut, smoothed, and raised in days where modern effort would take years. To the Egyptians, this was not magic. It was partnership. The gods provided instruments. Humans provided hands. Healing beyond time. Temples were not only places of prayer, they were hospitals. Within hidden chambers, glowing slabs pulsed with warmth. Patients lay upon them as harmonics filled the air. bones knit, fevers faded, wounds closed without scar. The gods called them restoration tables. Priests called them gifts of life. For the people, they were proof that the gods did not only demand devotion, they gave life itself. Some chambers went further. Pools of water shimmered as light infused them. Drinking healed fatigue. Immersion restored vigor. To bathe in such waters was to feel reborn. Knowledge machines. Beyond tools and healing, the gods provided devices of memory. Crystalline tablets stored wisdom, histories, star maps, records of crops, lineages of kings. With a touch, symbols glowed, revealing knowledge that could be read aloud to scribes. The greatest treasure was not gold, but these records. Within them, Egyptians preserved centuries of understanding without decay. Scrolls copied fragments, but the originals, eternal, crystalline, remained hidden in temple vaults. Some devices went further still, projecting images upon walls. Priests and scribes gathered to watch ancient stories unfold like living theatre, not painted, but alive with light. These were lessons of creation, law, and destiny, shown in forms no papyrus could hold. Transportation of the divine. Caravans crossed deserts not only with camels, but with carts infused by divine cores. Some moved without oxen, gliding as if sand offered no resistance. Others were carried by light itself, platforms hovering inches above ground, bearing stone, goods, and people swiftly across miles. Though rare, such transports amazed witnesses. Children laughed as they floated, elders wept in gratitude, and traders marveled at journeys cut from weeks to days. Egypt's reach expanded, not by conquest, but by mobility, born of divine technology. The secret of light. Night in Egypt was unlike night elsewhere. Not only torches lit the streets, orbs of glowing stone floated silently, casting pure radiance. Temples shone as if the sun lingered within their walls. Palaces glowed without smoke or flame. The gods taught Egyptians to carve crystalline rods that once attuned, captured and released light indefinitely. No fuel was required. No smoke choked the air. The city of Thebes at night glittered like a constellation upon earth. Foreign visitors gaped, returning home with stories of eternal flames and lamps that never died. To Egyptians, it was daily life, a blessing of cohabitation. Weapons of awe. Though Egypt valued harmony, its gods ensured defense. Sound weapons, rods that released thunderous waves, could scatter enemies without bloodshed. Shields of energy could repel entire volleys of arrows. Chariots infused with light moved faster than any horse alone. Yet these tools were tightly guarded. Pharaohs decreed they never be used for conquest, only protection. The gods agreed. War for expansion was forbidden. War for balance was permitted. Egypt's strength lay not in empire, but in preservation of Ma'at, a civilization elevated. Through these technologies, Egypt rose to heights unseen elsewhere. Its monuments endured millennia. Its healing surpassed centuries of progress. Its knowledge outlived empires. And yet, none of this replaced human effort. Farmers still tilled fields, artisans still shaped stone, scribes still filled scrolls. The gods did not give to replace, they gave to elevate. Humanity remained active, but never alone. Thus Egypt thrived, not as a kingdom of mortals alone, but as a civilization where gods and men co-created a world of wonder, order, and beauty. To the Egyptians, death was not an end. It was a doorway. And in the era when gods walked among men, That doorway was not imagined. It was mapped, engineered, and sanctified with technologies and knowledge brought from the stars. Death as transition, not loss. For common peoples of other lands, death was fear. For Egyptians, it was certainty. They did not see funerals as farewells, but as preparations for a journey. Families grieved, yes, but they also celebrated, for they believed their loved one was about to step into a vast, eternal voyage. This faith was not blind. It was reinforced by the presence of the gods themselves. Radiant beings, their bodies shimmering with energies unfamiliar to mortals, explained to priests that consciousness did not dissolve at death. It migrated, it traveled, it transformed. When gods spoke of the soul, they described it as a frequency, a pattern of energy that endured beyond flesh. Mummification, tombs, rituals, these were not superstitions, but technologies to preserve and guide that pattern. The sacred science of mummification. Mummification was more than preservation of a corpse. It was alignment of frequencies. Gods instructed priests in techniques, resins that stabilized tissue, salts that drew out decay, oils that infused the body with harmony. Every cut, every bandage, every word of prayer was part of a formula. To outsiders, it appeared gruesome ritual. To Egyptians, it was science, ensuring the body remained a stable anchor for the soul's journey. The wrapped corpse was not a husk, but a vessel, attuned to frequencies that allowed spirit to move freely. Even more mysterious were certain chambers deep within temples, where light and sound resonated during embalming. The gods explained that vibration itself sealed the soul, ensuring safe passage. Priests spoke chants not merely for worship, but for calibration. Tombs as gateways. The grand tombs, pyramids, hidden chambers, valley shrines, were not built only as monuments to vanity. They were engineered as gateways. Walls carved with texts were more than decoration. They were manuals, instructions encoded in symbols to guide the soul through stages of the afterlife. Star maps painted on ceilings pointed the way to destinations among constellations. Narrow shafts aligned with Orion, and Sirius acted as literal channels through which the soul could ascend. Priests explained, the body rests here, the soul rises there. And the gods confirmed it, describing how frequencies of thought and matter could pass along these alignments. Thus, tombs were not graves, they were launch pads into eternity, the technology of immortality. Beyond mummification and tombs, whispers tell of more direct devices. Chambers of light. Certain hidden rooms beneath temples contained crystalline pillars that bathed the deceased in waves of energy. The gods said this harmonized the soul's departure, ensuring clarity in the afterlife. Resonant sarcophagi. Some coffins were carved from single blocks of granite, not for durability alone, but because granite itself vibrated with cosmic frequencies. Lying within one ensured the soul resonated correctly with the universe. Orbs of passage. Rare objects, spheres that glowed faintly, were said to catch the departing essence and guide it upward like a beacon. Only priests trained by gods could operate them. These devices were never mass-used. They were reserved for pharaohs, high priests, or those chosen for reasons known only to the gods. But even commoners benefited from simplified versions of the rites, enough to ensure safe journeys of their own. Rituals of judgment. The famous weighing of the heart was not only metaphor. Priests described a chamber where light poured down from above, and the soul stood bathed in radiance. Its essence was measured against Ma'at, the balance of truth and harmony. Gods were present, not as symbols but as witnesses, tall figures with jackal heads, falcon eyes, ibis faces. They stood observing. When a heart was found pure, the soul ascended freely. When burdened with chaos, it struggled, its frequency tangled. The devourer of souls was not myth, but a phenomenon. Frequencies that could not harmonize with Ma'at dissolved back into the cosmic field. Egyptians called it punishment, the gods called it correction. Communion with ancestors. Death did not sever the living from the departed. Egyptians believed, and gods confirmed, that the soul remained present, accessible. Families built shrines, placed food, spoke prayers, not because they imagined presence, but because they knew it was real. At night, priests entered temple chambers, where sound vibrated at perfect frequencies, and ancestors' voices could be heard faintly. Some claimed to see luminous figures in the dark, answering questions, offering guidance. Thus, Egyptians lived surrounded not only by gods, but by their dead, never gone, always near. The pharaoh's eternal role. Pharaohs, once departed, did not simply vanish into memory. They joined the gods in the stars, their tombs aligned with Orion or Sirius, because those were the destinations of divine kin. Egyptians believed their rulers became mediators even after death, guiding the nation invisibly. This faith gave strength. Soldiers marched knowing their fallen pharaoh still watched. Farmers sowed seeds under stars, whispering thanks to kings whose spirits now traveled among constellations, legacy of the afterlife. Egypt's obsession with death was not morbidity, it was mastery. With divine guidance, they engineered a system that turned mortality into continuity, flesh into frequency, life into eternity. To live in Egypt was to know that death held no terror. It was passage, guided by gods, powered by technology of stone, sound, and light. No other nation knew such certainty. No other people walked with gods who mapped both earth and heaven. And so Egypt endured, fearless of time, fearless of death, confident that every soul was bound for stars.